Hello, and welcome to the Education Reformation, where it's our job to discover where education ought to go and how we might be able to get it there. Here we go. Well, I'm starting to feel pretty good. You want to go ahead and start talking about education?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, cool. So normally the episodes end up being about like between 45 minutes and an hour long, so we don't have to sit and talk for forever. But just to give you a little synopsis of what this is actually about is I'm actually pretty passionate about education in general. And one of the fields that I wanted to go into was actually teaching. I'd really like to be a college professor and help to shape young, malleable minds. But I noticed that all of the professors or teachers that I know are really fed up with how the system's actually set up. They have to deal with tons of bureaucracy. They're not very mobile. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll go into administration. Maybe I'll become a principal of a local high school or something like that. And they're in the exact same scenario. They get fired regularly because they can't fix the schools, but nobody lets them take any action to fix the schools. So it's like, that's kind of a rock and a hard place scenario.
Right.
So I decided that really the way to affect change in the school system is simply by discussing the theory of that school system. And there's plenty of people who do that already, but I come from more of an A/B testing, like science sample set of one type background. And I think that I can contribute a little bit. And so the podcast ended up being called the Education Reformation. So I'm hoping that after we get some listeners and a little bit more of a backing, we can move forward and actually influence the education system a little bit. But we'll see, where that goes and how it works out. So now that you know a little bit about the podcast that I've asked you to be on, give me a little bit of background information about you and your education, where you come from.
Well, actually, I'm not sure if you know, but I actually grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, and it was kind of rough growing up there because, ironically, I was the minority because I lived in, technically, it was Independence, Missouri, and I had to be bused all the way to close to the Kansas and Missouri border, so I had to get up like 5 o'clock in the morning, catch the bus by 5:30 just so I can get to school by 8, which was, is brutal. But yeah, I was one of literally, I think, 3 or 4 white kids in the entire school.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was definitely a challenge. As far as elementary school goes, I don't really remember much because I moved around a lot with my mom. So I was always in and out of schools. It wasn't until middle school when I went to live with my grandma that, I ended up in Independence and going to that, the inner city schools. And it really wasn't, to me, it's not really about them teaching us from what I remember. It was just about processing us through the grades. The teachers didn't give a shit at all. So it was just kind of getting us through. And it wasn't until I got to high school and I went to live with my dad, and I went to a small town called Breckenridge, Missouri. Population on the sign was 400, but we were pretty sure it was closer to like 250, 300. So going from like the inner city schools like that to a country school where, in my class, we only had 7 people from 9th grade to 12th grade. It was the same 7 people. Oh, wow. So it made it a little bit easier that way. And we also had the opportunity to play sports and stuff like that. But the education that we got there was obviously a little more one-on-one. So the teachers were able to get a little more personal with us and tailor their lesson plans to the way we were able to learn. So it did make it a little bit easier. Obviously, for me, it was rougher, but that was because I have, challenges with, not really learning, but like, ADD type issues. So, it was always a little bit harder for me than it is for other people, but I still managed to get through college. I have an associate's degree that's pretty much worthless now, but I have it.
Yeah. I feel the same way about my bachelor's. That's completely worthless to me.
Yeah. Well, the school I got it from was closed down for fraud like 4 years after I got it. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, it's not even technically accredited anymore. I'm like,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, my education career, I guess, has been interesting because I've seen, like I said, I've been from the inner city to the country, and I went to community college. I didn't go to a university, which I kind of regret because, looking back on it, I probably could have done a little bit more. But then again, like I said, learning's kind of a struggle for me.
And you're clearly an intelligent individual. You're not dumb or anything.
I can't learn it. It's just the way that the system is set up. It's difficult for me to thrive in that. Because hands-on, I have to express what I learned. Like getting it from my brain to my mouth is more difficult than me getting it from my brain to, say, my hands or something.
Right.
It's like I could build you what I'm thinking or seeing, or I could demonstrate it a lot easier than I could verbally say it to you. So
can you give me an example of the lesson plan or the class activity that would not work for you? And then give me an example of one that would work really well for you.
Yeah. Kind of like English versus science. In English, you had to read a book, and then you had to write like a summary or a report on what you read and what you thought about it or whatever. And in science, it's you're taught what this chemical and this chemical mixed together does, and then you go out in the lab. And then you physically use these chemicals, and then you build things, or you're dissecting things, or you're doing these things with your hands. And, that's what helps me learn is I have to do it in order to really grasp it. Mm-hmm. So for someone to sit there and say, well, I need you to read Of Mice and Men, and then I want you to write a report on the book, that's a struggle for me, so it's like I always thrived more in science and history than I did in any other class. Math was always a struggle, and English or language arts wasn't really a struggle for me. I always did okay, but it was, it took me longer than everyone else. And that comes down to the reading, and that's why I struggle with math so much, is because once the problems get more complex, I start to forget the first half, and I have to pretty much redo it, and then I just get frustrated.
I actually have a similar problem, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, because like with the English papers and whatnot, I have no problem grasping all of those concepts, but I get bored really easily. So what my brain does when I'm reading is I start breaking down the grammar of each sentence. So I end up having to read sentences 3, 4, 5 times before I can move on.
Exactly. That's exactly what I do.
Okay, great. So this is actually something that I think is really interesting because I think these are actually male qualities where for some reason, and I'm not exactly sure, I think it has something to do with the Industrial Revolution and the way that our country became very industrialized in the way that we educate people, where we're putting people in a box and then moving them down the assembly line of grades. But males, we've got, our current system has 6-year-old little boys who are required to sit in a classroom for 8 hours on end, and they get 30 minutes to go outside and run around. But that's not how we work. That's not how boys function. That's not how we comprehend things. We have to go out and beat each other up and understand how our bodies work in that way. And then we have to try and make a fire or something. And once we do that a couple times, we can pick it up so fast. But girls don't work the way that we do. And because early on we started having people say, well, we need to make sure that our girls are being educated really well, it kind of made a shift in that education system. And we were, as boys, expected to just keep up with it. There's actually advocate groups for young boys inside of the education field who are actually kind of reaching out for this, but it's kind of in conflict to a lot of the feminism or PC culture that's also currently going on in the education system. So they're having a lot of trouble making any ground. So I don't know if you're aware of those groups or not, but it'd definitely be worth checking out since you have two boys, right?
Yeah.
What age are they?
14 and 8.
What grade does that put your 14-year-old? Freshman in high school?
He's in 8th grade right now. He's actually in kind of like not nearly special needs, but because he's got real bad ADHD, he has a lot more developmental issues, and they're still trying to figure that out. So he's got like special teachers that literally kind of walk him through everything because everything is a lot harder for him.
Yeah,
but Aiden, he's a monster. He does good in class and all that. I mean, he had an incident not too long ago where he brought a knife to school because he wanted to show his friend. And so that was, a big issue for a little bit, but he said, he's like, I didn't think about it. I didn't think I was gonna, he knew it was wrong, but he's like, I didn't think that I was going to get caught. I just wanted to show my friend real quick. And
I used to do similar stuff when I was in school.
Yeah.
I would think I can take this because I'm not going to do anything bad with it.
Yeah. Back when we were in school, I was in a country school, so we all had guns in our cars and stuff like that because a lot of people were hunters and stuff like that, so nobody really looked twice. But then again, when there's only 7 kids in your class, it's not really a big problem.
Yeah, if something happens, you pretty much know that it's coming.
Yeah, pretty much. But, what you were talking about with, the education system and the Industrial Revolution, I think that was funny because I had either read or watched something a couple weeks ago about the education system and how it is underdeveloped. And it's funny because when you actually look at it and you think how, as society, we have progressed, just in the last 50 years, an incredible amount. But look at our education system. It's literally the same as it was in 1912. There's not really any difference. And, and you can apply that to anything, to our laws, to our government. All these things are so behind us as a society.
Yeah.
And this is where it's about to snap. And this is why, like Rome fell. Society was outpacing everything else. Yeah. And if you don't keep up on that, you're going to fall. And, that's the biggest problem with education. It doesn't teach you anything to move on in life. You do school as an adolescent is more of a babysitting program, and then college is where the real stuff is. That's
now it's actually getting even further past that to where college is basically high school plus.
Yeah. To be completely honest with you, if you really want a decent job and skills in life, you need to go to a technical college.
Yep.
Because these other colleges like high school, not one class do I ever remember teaching me how to manage my life, how to manage my bills, how to do finances, what I need to do for jobs, how to be a productive human. None of that was taught. It's all about memorizing things for a standardized test to make the state look good or whatever.
Right.
Because it's all about political numbers. When you really get down to it, you're not really educating anyone. You're just teaching them the past. That's not really an education, in my opinion, because an education means you need to be able to think for yourself, problem solve, do all these things that will advance you in life, not knowing what state became a state in 1831. I guess if you want to study that kind of stuff, then it's important for your career choice. But for me to this day, I've never needed to know all that. It's fun to know. And it makes you look and feel good about yourself, when you're talking to other people, sure. But, it doesn't pay my bills, so It's things like that to where our education system is so behind society, it's really just hurting everyone.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Well, and I think a big contributor to that is the simple fact that it's part of the government, where you basically got this colossus that we call the Department of Education. And once it's that big, it's really difficult to change things or move things because you have to run it all the way up the ladder. And, I mean, it's down to the level of the individual teachers who are like, you know, I could really use to teach my students a little more about this topic, but I can't because I have to meet these certain objectives.
Exactly.
And those objectives are good. Like, we need to have standardized testing in some form. But who comes up with those tests? I mean, who decides what our children need to learn? Because those people have a really huge job. I mean, they're controlling the next generation. They're controlling who that's actually going to be. And it's such an influence that governments in the past have actually used that to manipulate their societies into agreeing with them or basically brainwash them so that they could come to greater power later on. That's why you had Hitler's youth during World War II. He was thinking ahead. He was going, well, I'm going to shut up all the old people who know how things used to be so that when these kids grow up, they think I'm God. So, and the same thing's happening in the U.S. We have teachers that are trying their best to educate our students, but they can't do as good of a job as they should because there's so much larger governmental influence. There's too much red tape, basically.
Well, what's sad is, like, when you look at these other countries, Denmark, Japan, Finland, you know, some of these other, granted that they're smaller nations, but they don't, their education system, the way they do it, is just way better. You know, we are on a steady decline as far as where we rank in the world, in especially math and science. And those are kind of the most important, honestly. So it's like we need to start looking at what these other countries are doing and then start implementing it because it's obvious it works. There's proof. You know, you can't sit here and say, oh, well, we don't know if that's going to work. We don't trust that. It's clearly working and ours clearly isn't. So obviously there needs to be a change. It's just, I don't think that they want to.
And that's a really good point because something that I pointed out in a previous episode is that we're not really doing the science of education. We're not testing things. We're not like figuring out how to educate children. And that should be something that the Department of Education is doing all the time, is they should be constantly testing and figuring out what works, figuring out what doesn't work, understanding the science of pedagogy in general and how to actually relay quality information as opposed to what you were talking about with just memorizing dates, memorizing names. For instance, history is probably something that a lot of students struggle with, but you'll also find students who absolutely fall in love with history and they love hearing the stories, and because they hear them as stories because of a particular teacher doing a really good job, they remember the dates and everything easily. Because they have some sort of context to fit that information into. So now you have a structure that we're thinking, okay, this definitely works. Let's create a context. Let's talk about what actually happened, the story of it, and then add those dates and things that we want our children to know along the way. Okay, so now we've tested this. We know that this system works better. So now we adopt that. Then you take that system and you notice, or you come up with hypotheses where, okay, I think that telling this story this way really confuses the students that are learning that particular area of history. So now you start trying to come up with better ways to do that. And as you do this, we get further and further. You start to actually progress. And I mentioned yesterday in the episode that really we should have like 6, 7, or 8-year-olds learning how to do logarithms, learning how to do calculus, because the idea is to progress, right? We should be able to teach younger and younger and younger students more complicated information and thereby evolve our education system to where the opposite would happen in regards to what's happening today. Instead of having college get easier and easier and easier, and then having to do master's work and then PhD work and then post-PhD work, you would have basically a college degree at the end of high school, and then 20 years from now, we'd have a graduate degree at the end of high school, and a bachelor's be basically accomplished by the end of middle school. And there's no reason why we can't do that. For some reason, people think it's impossible. But, I mean, you're better at learning when you're that age than you will ever be. Your mind has more neuroplasticity. The brain works better at that age. Why are we not teaching more people more things at that age?
Right.
So, anyway, that was kind of a rant.
That's always bothered me, and I never understood, is the federal government controls pretty much the entire country as, okay, this is how you're going to teach. This is what you're going to teach. And for me, I'm always a why guy. Why are we learning that? Why do I need that? What is the purpose in this? And I think that, if I were to ever become president, I would take the Department of Education and I would disband it. To be completely honest with you, I would get rid of it. And I would allow the states to create their own internal education departments. Because at that point, you're localizing it. Then you can get to the communities, you can get to the teachers, and they can build the stuff that they think is going to work the best. Because as long as you're still learning and progressing, as a person and with knowledge, then that's really all that matters. The context of it can vary. But, as long as you have your basics, your reading, your writing, your math, your science, your creative arts and things like that, then that's really all you need. And you just need to present it to these kids in ways that they'll want to engage in it, and that isn't, this Ben Stein monotone, read this page and then, memorize these names. And it's just, kids today are smarter than we were back then. And that's just evolution. So they're bored, they see that they're not stupid anymore. Everybody knows that, the education system is a joke. So who's going to really want to put effort into it when they know it's not going to pay off? I mean, these kids in high school now know that nothing that they're learning is going to get them anywhere. So it's almost like, why bother? Why waste your time?
Absolutely. But a lot of kids who are middle school, high school age often don't have the foresight to realize that that's actually what's going on, right? Because I know when I was in high school, I didn't really care about the future. I just didn't have that much foresight. So I was just bored, and then that was it. So I would just get through the school day, go home, and then engage with whatever I was interested in, which was mostly video games. So I ended up playing a ton of video games. But then when I graduated high school and went to college, I was expecting to continue to be bored. I didn't realize I could just pick video games as what I do with my life, because everybody told me, oh, well, you can't make a living doing that. Meanwhile, there's game developers who make 4, 5, 6 times as much money in a year as I do. So why didn't I do that? It was because the baby boomers, or our older generation, didn't understand how education was or should have been progressing as we started coming up with, little things like the internet.
Well, it's just like just now we're starting to get, coding and cyber classes in our school. That should have happened nearly 10 years ago, honestly. So the fact that we're just now getting it shows you that we are a minimum of 10 years behind society as far as our education goes.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse until we literally destroy the old building of education and rebuild it. That's literally how it has to happen, because you can't just keep patching it the way that we are. Like my kids, both of my kids do coding lessons at home, because the school doesn't really care for that. They're not really, they do it, but they don't. They get like 30 minutes, or whatever to do, their little computer class or whatever. And it's super basic and easy. And I'm like, no. So I make my kids do it here at home for at least an hour a day. And that's because I tell them, if you want to play video games for a living, you need to know this. Yep. If you want to have a decent job and never have to worry about money or anything, you need this. This is the future of society, is cyber. We're going to be a cyber society. And I was like, any skills outside of that are going to become obsolete.
What kind of coding do you have them doing? Like, where are they taking classes and how do they do that?
I think I have them on Khan Academy, and I think it's like Cyber Coders or something. It's like a Minecraft coding thing for little kids, where they code inside Minecraft so they can visually see their code working, as they're doing it. But Jason, I have him on Khan Academy doing like JavaScript, C++, stuff like that.
Okay, cool.
Just real basic stuff so they can get familiar with it, and then, they can move on to advanced stuff like Python and all that other crap later.
Okay, cool. Would you mind sending me, or like actually finding what sites they're using so that I can put them in the show notes?
Yeah, I know for a fact it's Khan Academy. Okay, they both do that one. Because it's free. There's Udemy, what I use for, I'm taking classes for Unreal Engine and C++, but Udemy is $10 a class, which isn't that bad at all. But
not bad at all. I like Udemy too.
Yeah.
I was actually trying to take a game development course on there, and I kind of slacked off on it because I got interested in the podcasting thing and the esports thing with you. So I just have so many interests, I can't chase them all down.
Yeah. November and December is always hard for me, so I always just kind of take a break and whatnot. But
I had something that I was going to ask you about. So something that I'm really interested in doing I want to do several episodes, maybe like a 3 to 5 episode series about accreditation, because I think that the public school system is going to die in the next 30 to 50 years. I think it'll take a longer time to die than it should, just in the education system's fashion.
Yeah.
But I think there needs to start being some sort of accreditation system for stuff like Udemy and for stuff like Khan Academy, where you say maybe your kids go to school, instead of doing 8 hours, they do 3 or 4 hours at the school. Then they get bused home and they have the rest of the day to pursue their own interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there could be some sort of track some way. And I think that the blockchain technology might have some influence on this because of the cryptography and stuff that goes on there. So they could somehow accredit like which courses they've actually done, and then it would be backed up on the blockchain somehow. So that each person has like a block of stuff that they are certified as understanding. And then you can go to your job and they look up your wallet address and go, oh, okay, well, he's got this much knowledge in this category and only this much knowledge in this category because he's taken these courses since he was in elementary school. So like, yeah, maybe he's not as good of a writer when it comes to literature, but he's a savant at coding. So, you know, the newspapers don't want to hear from him, but he can go to Blizzard or Activision or whoever and work for them, while probably at the same time using that knowledge to create things on his own in his own time. So what do you think about accreditation moving forward?
My personal opinion is I think we should probably stop using that word. I mean, I get the purpose behind it is you don't want, you know, a bunch of, you know, random places. Like I get the point behind it, but I just think it's silly because Like, if you learn it and you can demonstrate it, then it really, in my opinion, it shouldn't matter where or how you learned it. You know, it's like if I go to Khan Academy and I learn coding and then I'm like, hey, here's my, Khan Academy thing to prove that I did it. And then somebody walks in, with a degree from MIT or whatever, and it's like, here, I did the same thing. Obviously they're going to look at that piece of paper, with more value than mine without even giving me the opportunity to prove my skills. Right. So that's where my problem lies, is people aren't even given an opportunity solely because of that piece of paper and how much value is placed on it, which to me is Neolithic, honestly.
Yeah, it's stupid. It's outright stupid.
Yeah, because I'm the type of person, if I want a task done, or if I'm looking to find someone to do it, I want you to physically prove that you can do it. I don't care about what you've done to get there, how you did it, where you did it. If you can do it and you can do it to my satisfaction, then that's what I want. Right. It's like, I don't care what a piece of paper says. It's all it is a dead tree, Yeah. And it's like, it's literally meaningless, but to some people it's so valuable, and then you get burned because that guy from MIT is going to want like $100,000 when someone like me, who literally probably has the exact same skill set, would want a little bit less. Yeah. But they're not even going to consider that solely because of the value of that piece of paper.
Exactly. And we can actually take this lesson from the technical crowd, like the Valley and San Fran area, all of the tech startups and stuff that's coming up. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at like Duolingo, are you familiar with Duolingo?
No.
Okay, so they're a free online language learning software. And the way that they hire is actually they scan through resumes. They say, okay, this person looks like they know what they're doing. And then they call you in for an interview, and they have you program something. And they have certain things that they want done, and you have like a week to knock it out or whatever. And then after that, if you pass that part of the interview, you go in and do an in-person interview where you basically sit down with one of the people that's already coding for them, and they like tell you what to do and let you do it. And they'll be like, we need to just fix this bug. And it's not actually a bug that they have. It's something that they fixed already. But they say, go fix this bug and see what the person does. And if the person goes through and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and they fix it really effectively and really efficiently, then you move on to the next stage of the interview. And at that point, you're just negotiating over salary or whatnot. And that's how they go about hiring their people. And there's also, whether or not you fit into their work culture or company culture, but that stuff's pretty intuitive as far as just having somebody who's good at hiring people. They're going to be able to figure that out pretty easily. So we need to start viewing, because the technology crowd moves at a faster rate than any other field, right? Because they're constantly having to update. They're constantly having to develop new things and keep up with how fast technology is able to move. So that lean approach is something that's really effective. That's why you can have people like Uber start up and in 2 years be like $1 billion company or whatever, is because they know how to create that lean culture. Stuff like WordPress, they don't even have like a centralized office. They have people all over the world that work for them remotely. So they have very little overhead, and they all just communicate on Slack or whatever chat software, and they get stuff done super fast. So why are we not doing this in education?
Right. Well, see, and that's the difference, because when you look at the tech sector of society, the way that they do their interviews and the way that they do a lot of things is completely different than the industrial sector of society. And it's like, even with game development, with as many interviews that I've had, and the people that I know and I've talked to, it's all about what you can prove versus what you've learned.
Yeah.
They don't care what you've learned. A lot of people don't even have college degrees, in that field. Like, some of them will have a degree, but maybe not in that field or whatever. And some of them that I know don't even have a degree. They were just self-taught, You know, so it's like, you know, some of these people, they just go out and you learn the program. You're like, well, this is what I want to do. I want to develop CGI for video games. They learn it, and the next thing you know, they're hired by the company because they're good at that task.
Right.
So,
are you familiar with Sammy Kamkar?
No.
Do you remember the MySpace thing that happened right after the MySpace got bought? They had some guy shut down the entire site, and eventually there were like T-shirts and shit that said "Sammy is my hero." Well, Sammy Kamkar is Sammy from those T-shirts, and he accidentally, well, intentionally, but he didn't think it was going to go this far. He made a worm, a programmed a worm, and had like tens of millions of friends like overnight. By accident, and all of them had on their page, Sammy is my hero. And his code would end up being on their page or whatever. So it spread super, super fast. Well, he ended up not being able to touch a computer basically for 3 years, because of legal action that they took against him. But before he got to that point, he was, programming hacks and stuff for Counter-Strike, which you're familiar with, I'm sure. And he ended up being basically this guy sitting in his mom's house programming and fighting against the Counter-Strike's anti-hack team. It's like him against this whole team at this big company, and he's beating them like on a monthly basis. They would fix everything, and then he would find another loophole or another back door and get his stuff through again. And he would just go back and forth with them and constantly update it. And so he doesn't have any formal education in computer hacking or anything. And turns out the government ends up hiring him to go after black hat hackers in Romania or wherever.
So, well, a lot of those cybersecurity companies, I don't know if you've ever been to a cybersecurity convention or not, but a lot of times they'll have booths set up to where if you can penetrate their security, they'll hire you.
Yeah.
To fix it.
Yep.
You know, so it's like you just have to know what you're doing, and that's it. And that's the way it should be. You know, you shouldn't, like I said, you shouldn't have to have this, you know, accredited piece of paper that says, hey, you learned things that are irrelevant in your life, but you learned them here, so this should get you somewhere. Like, you know, that's
the reality is that it doesn't anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
I went to a smaller university, but I do have a bachelor's in linguistics. Well, I couldn't get into any grad schools, so, and if you can't do grad work, then you can't be a linguist. Like, you can't work in that field. So I went and got a manufacturing job that pretty much ruined my marriage. Not to mention the fact that my ex-wife's a psycho, but and now I work like in the family business doing shit that I hate doing. So, like, clearly getting a bachelor's degree didn't really help me.
Right.
So now I'm starting to like podcast, and this is like becoming my passion really quickly. I really like talking to you. I really like talking to my other friends who all are super interesting people. Like, why? I don't understand how someone like me, like, I'm clearly an intelligent person. Like, I understand concepts. I'm really good at theory, but I can't make money. Like, money is just something that does not compute to me.
Exactly.
So I don't understand. I feel like I'm contributing to society in some way, but I'm not getting compensated for that. And I think a lot of that has to do with how my education was structured. So, moving on, I'm going to stop ranting about random topics. What was your favorite, like, subject or most interesting or most helpful subject in school, whether it was middle school, high school, college, whatever?
It's always been science, honestly. It's funny because, like, I've always done really good in science and history, because history is, I guess it's about learning about, you know, all the cool things that happened in the, you know, in the past, and, you know, and taking that information and building on it and growing from it. And the same thing with science is you're learning about all these things that are going on, and it makes you I guess, appreciate the bigger picture of everything around you. It's not just about me, or, it's not just about humanity. We're literally a speck of nothing in this vastness. Like, we literally mean nothing to anything, but, we look at ourselves, these people without this, education or that sense, they're just like, oh, well, I don't care about all that. I don't care about global warming. I don't care about all that. But if you did, things would be so much better, It's like a lot of people don't want to see the bigger picture, and I think that for me, that's what I saw when I would get in those classes, especially science, is there's just so much there that is just, I don't know, I can't describe it. Just science to me is like a holy grail. I couldn't ever be like a scientist or something because, like I said, I struggle with math. Which is funny because I did really well in physics in college. I passed with a 93%. But I always struggled with math. But understanding the concepts and the theories and how it all works, I can do it in my head perfectly. But trying to express it was always a challenge. And, my professor in college understood that. So, I think he was a little bit more, easy on me on my work as long as I just talked to him about it and explained what I could, and he understood that I grasped it.
Yeah. You're demonstrating that you're comprehending the topic.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I got away with, I think, a lot of it. I guess is the plus of going to a community college. There was only, 20 to 30 people in my class. Sometimes less. Actually, no, physics, a lot of people dropped out. So we were probably around 15 to 20. Yeah. But in that, when that was the thing, I was allowed to go up to him and be like, hey, and I could demonstrate and show him physically that I knew the material, without having to, write a thesis or, an 18-page report, because to me, that is just, I would rather smash my head in between my laptop and my keyboard.
Yeah. Like that little GIF. Have you seen that stick figure GIF of the little stick guy that's like banging his head on the keyboard?
Yeah, I have one like that where he's typing and he's getting mad and he starts hitting his hands and his arms start like falling apart and blood's going everywhere.
Yeah. That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah. I'm like, that's me. That is me right there.
He's like chopping at the keyboard with his arms and shit.
Yeah.
So how has that been like helpful? You talk about the physics and understanding science and kind of the natural world at large. How has that been helpful at like post graduation?
Not one fucking bit. Not one bit at all.
You don't think that influences your worldview in a way that's positive?
Yeah, my worldview is affected by it because I think differently than most people do. But as far as like, job or society or financial value, it hasn't benefited me at all.
Okay, cool. So it has like character building helpfulness, but it doesn't have like practical helpfulness.
Like a character or like just an internal process that, I like I said, it just makes me think about things in a different way than most people do. Most people are just like a direct, A-B, I just want to go like this. And I'm more of I want to try and maximize everything, as I see it is, I'm only here for roughly 70 to 80 years. So I want to be able to provide something to better, everyone, it's like I've got my kids, so it's my responsibility to make sure that they can survive, and to do that and be ignorant about your surroundings, that's how you kill your species.
Yep.
Honestly, so if we as humans don't start understanding that, then we are going to die.
Yeah.
It's like global warming. Our planet is dying. Our planet is dying, and a lot of people don't care. They either don't want to care, they don't know how to care, or they're just, the type of people that, hey, I believe everything my government says, and I just don't have the time to want to deal with it. And that's bothersome because once we get to that point, there is no coming back. Like, you can't just be like, okay, now let's fix it, fine. It's not like a broken window. You get to the point and you're just going to be stuck inside that burning house, and there's no way out.
Yeah, and the planet's going to be fine. It's
the planet
that we need to be worried about.
Exactly.
So what I hope is that eventually we figure out how to make humans live for somewhere between like 500 to 900 years. And if we were able to extend our lifespan to almost a full millennia, then we would start to be able to understand and have a little bit more foresight, which maybe we'd end up with a massive population problem, but we would be able to actually see it. We'd have that bird's eye view and be able to comprehend what we're actually doing and why we're doing it and how we should be doing it better.
Yeah, I mean, the way it really, when we talk about, all this education, it really comes down to the way that our society is structured. And that's from a government standpoint. We are just so behind on literally everything that it's causing a lot of problems. It's like we have this brand new high-powered engine inside this Ford Model T.
Yeah.
And eventually that Ford Model T is not going to be able to take that much power, and it's just going to fall apart. And that's where we're at right now, is the bolts are coming loose.
Yeah. Without, burning the whole system down, and I'm gonna force you to answer this, if I can. Without burning everything down, how do we go about starting to affect some change for the better on this education thing?
We need to take politics out of education, and we need to start figuring out what is vital to the success of our species.
Yeah.
Then once we get those settled, everything else will just kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
It's those kind of two critical things right there that we're lacking. And if we can add those into the system, then you can start to just kind of snowball effect it from there.
Right. It starts to build up and affect other things as well.
But until that happens, you're just you're stalemating, You can't do anything until you eliminate those factors and start to want to progress, as a society and advance our education and our knowledge. Our brains are really powerful, but it's like we're piddling with sticks and stones still when we could be, making plasma weapons, but we're with bow and arrows. And it's like, I don't know if it's a comfort thing or if it's a lazy thing or what, but there's something that just isn't right or adding up as to why we aren't advancing our education the same we are our technology, because they really go hand in hand. Our education system was designed to help us advance, the technology. The Industrial Revolution is the whole reason we structured our educational system the way we did, and we advanced past that, but we left our education system behind.
Yeah. So I think it has a lot to do with that colossus of education, that significant bureaucratic system.
And that's what I think needs to end. We need to end the political education structure that we're in, and we need to start. You give it to the states. Take it out of the government's hands. Okay, here, Connecticut, let's see what you can do with your education and how you guys want to educate your children. And then we'll compare it to California or Oregon, and we'll see how these different models are working across the country. And then that can help us, maybe rebuild a federal system that can oversee all of it.
Right.
But I think breaking it down into like a micromanaging system is going to be a lot more effective, because you're going to get that ground level feel. I don't really know how to describe it, but when you break it down smaller like that, it becomes easier and less mismanaged, I guess.
Yeah, it almost sounds like maybe private education or maybe a decentralized system needs to start being on the rise, so that when the public education system does crash, those companies can come up and compensate for that.
Yeah, the biggest problem that I see in this is greed and corruption, honestly, because, for an example, when I lived in Toledo, Ohio, my son Jason went to a charter school because, obviously of his, disabilities or whatever, it was harder for him to be structured in in a city school because even the teachers would force him to be isolated, because he had social issues. So instead of, reprimanding the kid who was picking on him or whatever, they would just tell Jason, you need to go sit at this table by yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like they're not fixing the problem, they're just isolating him. And it would always irritate me with that, because it's like, did you reprimand the kid who hit him or spit in his food? And I'm like, well, we had to talk with him, yeah. And I'm like, well, why is my son being isolated and that kid still gets to be with the rest of them? And they could never answer that. And it got to the point where I wasn't allowed in the school because I was just literally destroying them. I wasn't being, like one of those types of parents. I was just destroying them with intelligence. And
you have a spine too, and they're not used to parents coming in and having a spine because most parents don't know any better. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of kids, and especially in that town, it's just a babysitter. That's what school is. It's a babysitter.
So that their parents can go to their shit jobs, and
it's
then their
just
kids are going to grow up and have a similar shit job.
Yeah, and it's like we need to get out of that mentality, And so when I took him to this charter school thinking, well, this is going to be really great, they were talking about all this technology that they were having. And, in the first year they did, each kid had a tablet and they got to do, all stuff on their tablets and stuff. And then it started to become, well, we need grants, we need money. And then they started raking in all this money, but not teaching kids anything. I'm looking at some of his work and I'm like, there's no context or base to it. They posted on on their Facebook wall, and because I commented on it, they actually took it down. But it was, they were doing some sort of word engagement, and they used the song Baby Got Back. And this is for fifth graders, mind you. And I'm like, I get your idea of what you're trying to do, but at the same time, you're teaching, like, we all know what that song is about,
Yeah.
Like, everybody knows what that song is about. So, when they had the word, my anaconda don't want none unless you got big buns, and that was on their whiteboard. And then the kids below it wrote, I forget what it was, but it's like, it was a wordplay on it, and it was based on food. So the kids' version of it was good. But the fact that they had to hear that, and I'm just thinking, like, that is one of the most sexually explicit songs. I'm like, how did this get into, an education, plan? Like, I'm confused. And it's not that it, upsets me or bothers me. I'm just thinking, like, is this really beneficial to the kids as far as their, mental well-being or, the advancement of their knowledge? Because to me, that's just kind of dumbing them down a little,
Yeah, and at that point, you're asking questions like, are they even being educated during their education?
And that's my problem is some of these places, like these charter schools, I'm afraid that they're just going to be complacent so they can make money, and we need to figure out a way to take that money out of it. I agree. Teachers need to be paid a hell of a lot more than they do because they are the representation of our country. They're the ones that place our kids, they're the reasons why, we're number one in this or number one in that. And right now we're not. So we have to look at that. Well, if the teacher's morale is down and they don't give a shit because they're only making $20, $30 or, $20,000 to $30,000 a year and they're struggling, then that's going to reflect on the kids.
Yeah.
Your teacher comes in stressed, worried about her bills. She's not going to care about teaching you. She's just trying to survive. So that needs to be eliminated. The teachers need to not have that. They need to know that they're taken care of so that they can take care of the students a lot better than how it's being done. And then in turn, that's going to create, you're going to see our numbers as far as intelligence. We're going to go back up to the top where we used to be. And it gets better. That's how it gets better.
Yeah.
But
most people don't care about whether or not it gets better.
Exactly. And that's the problem. That's the American mentality.
Yeah. Well, I've actually got to go take a leak, but I'm going to ask you a question before I go, and then you can just ramble about it, and I'll be back in a couple seconds. So the question is this. If you were a teacher, what class would you want to teach? And you can note that it doesn't have to be a class that's currently actually part of the school curriculum. And maybe also answer, like, what would your preferred teaching style be? Is that cool? I'm going to run, take a leak, and you can just ramble about that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll be right back.
All right, cool. As far as what classes I would like to teach if I was capable, and this is assuming that I have all the qualifications and knowledge to do so, I would probably say science, math, or computers, mainly because those are the three most critical aspects to education and the future development of society and people in general. As far as the style of teaching, I'm not 100% sure because, like I said, I'm a little different than most. I'm very hands-on, so I would if I had my perfect world, I would want to teach everyone the way that they're comfortable. So if I could build a class of all hands-on, like first period is all my kids that are hands-on and learn through, physically doing the things. And then my second period class is those that can learn by just lectures and hearing it and, explaining it. Then I think that would be a really good model to stand by. But, you got to add a way for them to want to engage. And that's really what it comes down to is how can you get these students engaged in the topic or engaged in the class, because once they're engaged, then that knowledge is going to sink in and stick really well versus them just sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, listening to, Ben Stein monotone on about, the American Revolution or whatever. So it's all about finding how you can engage with your students and then taking that and building a method from that.
Hey, I'm back, by the way.
Cool, I literally just finished.
Sweet. Good timing.
But yeah, I was just saying probably math, science, and computers, but I stress that as far as a teaching method, you need to figure out a way to engage the students so they're not necessarily willing, but you need to engage them in order for them to retain the information, and that's kind of where a lot of people disconnect, is there's not enough engagement.
Right. Yeah. That sounds great. So are you familiar with Tim Ferriss?
I think I've heard the name a few times, maybe a TED Talk, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, cool. So he's kind of like a productivity guru is what people call him, but I started reading his books and stuff pretty early on, back when I was in high school, and he's actually proposed an idea that I think is a really good idea. He wants to start seeing stuff like meta-learning classes, where you basically teach the kids how to go about learning in the best way possible. Mm-hmm. And you can do stuff like, for instance, memorize the serial numbers on dollar bills. And if you get good at, if you know how to do it, you can memorize that serial number and then recall it a month later with ease. And so you would be able to engage the students with that, hey, look, this is what's possible if you pay attention in this class. And then you teach them the best ways to go about learning, or the fastest ways and the most effective things to do while they're learning. And then they start being oh, wow, I can read books really fast and absorb that information and then put that application, or actually apply that knowledge. So I would be really interested to see that class be taught. I definitely wish that I had one of those classes when I was in school.
Yeah. So probably would have been a hell of a lot more helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you mentioned you've kind of tailored your kids' education to an extent just by making them take coding classes and stuff like that. Is there any other ways that you kind of tailor their education specifically to them?
I mean, it's kind of, I guess, situational, because, like, if they come home with a project or, an assignment, or they're learning something specific in school, I'll go beyond what they're learning and be like, well, this is, because a lot of what I'm seeing is outdated information that they're using. And I'm like, like for example, Jason had to do a project on Christopher Columbus, which his teacher's still teaching that he's the one who discovered America. We all know that's wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, buddy, that's not right. I'm like, that's not right. The Japanese were here, the Vikings were here, the Mayans were here, all well before Christopher Columbus. And I'm like, so, and I showed him the information, and that's what I had him present. I'm like, you can't use this outdated information because it's inaccurate, and she shouldn't be teaching it to you. It's one thing to teach them, Christopher Columbus, found America, and, we used to think that he was the first, but, through recent, studies and archaeological, we've determined that that's not true. He wasn't the first. He was the first European from across the globe or whatever, but he wasn't the first. So, and it's things like that really, really just kind of piss me off, when they're so willing to teach this outdated information. So once I see that, then I'll go beyond and I'll correct it for them, and I'll educate them on those things. Like Aiden, he really likes this one channel, this YouTube channel that I like. I can't pronounce the name because I think it's German, but it's like Kyrgyzstan or something like that. And it's an educational channel where the last video that we watched was about the Ebola virus, and it's really cool because it's done kind of like cartoony. It's a special program. I don't know how to really describe it, but it's done in a way that is both educational and entertaining, and he loves it. And he's learned a lot just from those videos. And we can sit here, and I sit here with my 8-year-old son, and we can talk about outer space, the planets, extraterrestrial life, and things like that. He was in first grade, and he knew all of the planets in the solar system before his brother did, and his brother's in 8th grade.
Yeah.
So he's telling me more stuff about outer space and science and physics and math than most kids his age know, because of what, how far beyond we take his lessons, when they're presented to me at home.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to get them to really see outside of the small box that the education system wants to keep you in. It's like, you got to get out of that, and there's more out there that you can see, and it's a lot easier. It's like climbing up to the top of the mountain to see the whole plane versus being on the plane and trying to see it all.
Yeah.
And that's how I try and get them to think, is you got to get higher so you can see more.
Yeah, not high like. But.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no. I'm just saying, you got to open yourself up and and whatnot so you can see more. You got to climb the mountain to see the valley.
Yeah.
Well,
hey man, it sounds like you're a fantastic parent. I'm not gonna lie, because hearing some of the stuff that you're doing with your kids, and just hearing the way that you think about the world, I wish I had a parent who believed in me that much. And my parents were great. Don't get me wrong. I had fantastic parents, but
I didn't.
Especially my dad was not nearly as interested in me as he should have been, until I got to the point where I was like 17, 18. Then he could have a conversation with me. He's just not a kids kind of guy. So it sounds like you're doing an amazing job raising your kids.
Yeah, well, it's just I know that the only way that they're going to succeed in life is if they're intelligent. Like that's it, So it's like they've got to rely on that, because I'm not going to be here forever, so I got to get as much into them as I can, and I don't sugarcoat things for them. Like I've even talked to them about death and explained how death works and my processes and thoughts and theories on death. Mm-hmm. And it's like I told my youngest, I'm like, I don't get sad when people die. I hated my mom, so that was a different story. But like when my grandma died, I wasn't sad, and he's like, aren't you upset? And I'm like, well, no, because she's better now. It was like, we all live and we all die. Like,
yeah, I like to tell people that none of us are getting out of this life alive. Oh shoot, did I lose you? Okay, well, unless he comes back, I'm going to wrap up the podcast.
And deteriorate, and that's what old age is.
Oh, you cut out real hard there for a little bit. Can you go back like 20 seconds or so?
Talking about the telomeres?
Yeah, you haven't said anything to me about telomeres yet.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, well, I explained to him, in the death process, how aging and death works. And I was explaining to him that in your chromosomes, you have telomeres at each end. And when those chromosomes split to reproduce or whatever, I said, you lose a little bit, that shaves a little bit of that cap off. And then once you lose that cap, I was like, then it starts cutting down your DNA structure of those chromosomes. I was like, that's what old age is. That's why people die. And I was like, until we can actually stop those caps from deteriorating, I was like, then it's inevitable that we're all going to die. So there's no reason to be sad about it, because it's how nature works. It has to work. It's called a balance. Yeah. And, and I'm like, and who's to say that that's the end though? I'm like, because there is there's a multiverse. I was like, there are multiple universes and probably multiple dimensions. So I was like, to say that we end here is pretty uneducated, in my opinion. And
how does Aiden react to all this?
He takes it in. He likes to ask questions, like when I told him about the telomeres, he's like, well, what are they? He's like, what do they do? And so we got online, and that's when I showed him one of the Kyrgyzstan's videos about it, and then that's when he got hooked. Yeah. And it's things like that when I explain these things to him, it's kind of like a sci-fi fantasy, but it's kind of factual, because it's
very
like
factual.
They're so out of the world but they're true. So, to me, they're fascinating, and it might just be because it fascinates me. So I put so much feeling and passion into it when I'm explaining it that's probably why he likes it, Yeah. I mean, I could sit here like Ben Stein and be like, well, our telomeres, they deteriorate, and that's that, and then it's probably not that fun. Like, God, that's boring, But, when you explain it, in the ways that I do, I get excited about it. So, I think it kind of rubs off on him. But, that it's the things that I do. It's like, I'll tell you, this is death, but here's everything that's involved in it. You can't just be like, don't touch that light socket with that fork. Why? Just don't do it. Well, guess what? It's going to get done, So it's like, explain to him, don't stick the knife in the fork, or don't stick the knife in the light socket, because that electricity is going to come through that knife, and into your arm, and it could explode your heart.
Yeah. And do you know what electricity is? Like, explain it to you.
Exactly, and that's what we do. Like, I have 2 stun guns, in the kitchen or whatever, they're flashlights, and, we'll, mess with them. And I tried to explain to him, what electricity is and how it affects your body, because I'm like, telling him, well, this is, a 600,000 volt stun gun. And he's like, won't that kill you? And I'm like, well, and then I explained to him what volts and amps are. And I was like, well, a volt isn't as deadly as an amp, so I explained these things to him, here and there. And some of it he really grasps. Others, it's probably a little over his head, but it's kind of like planting the seed for later, because it's like, I didn't get that as a kid. I didn't really have parents. I raised myself. Yeah. So,
and he's what? It's like 6 to 8.
Yeah, Aiden's 8 now, or he'll be 8 in January 2nd.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, at that age, he's so curious and he wants to know so much. I've heard him online before. Does he have a YouTube channel or something?
He does. He's only got 1 video, I think. But his thing with his videos is I'm trying to get him used to having some sort of structure, because he just wants to talk, and ramble on about whatever. And I'm like, well, buddy, if you're wanting to do it for real, you can't just, ramble on about what you like about this or that. Like, that's not really going to entertain people. Like the videos that he did on my channel, he did 3 videos on my channel for Destiny 1 where he went and talked about the different enemies,
Cool.
And so he did those. Each video within a day was over 1,000 views, which was more than my videos ever did that fast.
Well, I'm going to link to your YouTube channel in the notes. There probably won't be much traffic from me because I'm just starting out, but I figure if
people are listening and want to check Aiden out on the YouTube video, I'll link.
Yeah, well, if they go to my channel, I think it's called The Little Guardian. There's a playlist, the Little Guardian playlist, and those are his videos that he made.
Okay, cool. I'll just link them straight to the Little Guardian playlist, and then if they want to check other stuff out too, they can. Yeah. Because, you know, a lot of the stuff that's on your channel is not exactly intellectual content.
No, not really.
We like to have fun. So, you know. Well, cool, man. This has been a blast.
Yeah, I mean, I like doing things like this. So.
Yeah, if I get a little bit more of a following going and stuff, would you be willing to do kind of like a round 2? Maybe just answer some questions from the audience and whatnot?
Yeah, I'm always down.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll hit you up when that hopefully happens.
Sweet. Oh, I'm going to go get some lunch then.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do the same. All right, man. Well, have a good one. I'll probably hear you online tonight.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, see ya.
That's it.
That was so much fun. So real quick, before you go, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you'd like to hear more of our thoughts or debauchery, you can find us on YouTube and Patreon at The Draylor Show. That's DREYLOR. Or visit our humble WordPress blog by going to thedraylershow.wordpress.com. Those links will also be in the description below as well. Thanks so much.